Back from your amazing break. If we can ground our energy and ground to the present moment, I would be so thankful for that. I'll know that you are ready because I will be able to see all your eyes and I won't be hearing any talking. Still hearing some whispers, and that's fine because we are all adults. That's okay. But I'm not going to be before you too long. My name is MelissaRoshan. I go by MelRo for short, and I will be sharing some space with you all this afternoon or this morning, and I'm really, really excited. Also, shouts out to the amazing youth in the back. Let's give them a round of applause. They came here on their summer break because they said, hey, I want to learn and grow, and I think that that's really amazing, and it also shows that you are leaders because you care about your future. So definitely wanted to big up you all. Here is my information. If you all decide that you would like to connect afterward, I would love that. As we are listening to this keynote, and I'm trying to, we're gonna flip back. Yeah, no worries. And also I do want to thank everyone from the center for entrusting me with this amazing opportunity to come and serve and address you all. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of Mary Vicario. Yeah, Mary is amazing, right? So Mary started out as just like you, I was in a few of her trainings, and then I went up to her and said, hey, I've adopted you as my mentor, deal with it. And so she dealt with it, and now we train alongside of one another, and we actually just did a series of educational videos that are going to support youth that live in foster care, so that was amazing. I mentioned Mary because I actually wouldn't be in this room had it not been for her. She introduced me to the fine folks here, and so I'm very, very thankful. All right, so welcome, welcome. I am going to be talking about some heavier things today, so especially for my youth in the back, if you feel some heavier feelings as I am presenting, we are going to be together, and I'm happy to unpack those things with you after the session, or if you need to excuse yourselves, please do so. The adults already know that they can do that, but please, if you need to excuse yourself, it is okay. Self-care is the best care. So I will be sharing my story, and like I said, it has some heavier moments in it, so let's just breathe through those and have an amazing time. Does that sound good? Yeah? Okay. So how many of us know that adversity does not discriminate, right? We have all been acquainted with pain. So the reason why I put this slide here is oftentimes when I'm sharing my story, people feel like they can't really necessarily relate to it directly. But if we've all been acquainted with pain, then we all can relate to that. And so when I'm connecting with folk, I try to connect on a base human level and talk about how do we flip our painful experiences into those of purposeful ones. How do we, there's a word, it's called alchemy. How do we alchemize? How do we transform experiences that are traumatic into triumphant ones? How do we take wounds and turn them into wisdom and works of art? That's what we're going to be going over today. What that means for you is to really consider where you're at within your own self. How are you going to continue to take care of your own self, heal your own self, because we know that we do the work so that we can do the work for others. What it's also going to mean is, as we're listening and we're going into our next sessions, is how do we really create best practices for our youth that are in foster care? And notice I didn't say foster youth, right? Because they're youth that live in foster care, and our youth are not their lived experiences. So how do we create those best practices? That's what we'll be talking about today. But before I go into my own journey, there is someone that I need to tell you all about who is very important to this story. So what it's going to require you to do is simply use your imagination. I'm going to describe this person, I'll describe where they're living, and I just want you to kind of pull them up in your consciousness. So for a few moments, imagine that there's a 13-and-a-half-year-old beautiful Black girl walking down the streets of Chicago. Know this, she's lived in foster care since she was 8 years old due to family abuse. And food has become her medication, right? And we know that teenagers oftentimes, in general, whether they've been through trauma or not, they love junk food because it's a way that they cope just by being teenagers, but it also produces those dopamine hits for them. Especially a child that's gone through trauma, definitely going to oftentimes utilize food sometimes as a way to cope. And this person, this young girl, was no different. Let's give her a name. Her name is Sarah. Sarah is 13 and a half years old, had lived in foster care since she was 8 due to family abuse. Sarah is the F word, fat, right? She is also gay. She also lives in foster care. So she has several points of marginalization against her, and it hurts her. Sarah is absolutely tormented at school, and she's failing all of her classes, and she figures that just maybe this bag of chips will bring her peace. So one day, Sarah is walking home from school, eating her bag of chips, and she sees a man from the neighborhood that she recognized, and this man always made her feel very uncomfortable when she would see him. But against her better judgment on this particular day, when the man asked her to go with him into his house, Sarah did, because she had been so tormented at school, friends, that she felt like really lonely and felt like she wanted some type of father figure. This man was 53. So even though her inner self said, he's not safe, there's something within her that said, go anyway. And how many of us know that oftentimes teenagers, they cannot differentiate fight or flight, stay away between butterflies in their belly. Their perception of safety is off. But especially if you have a child that has gone through a lot of trauma, what ends up happening is their pain threshold is a lot higher. They can take a lot more, or they might surround themselves with unsafe situations thinking that they can keep them safe because of the trauma that they've gone through. Sarah goes with this man, and unfortunately, he does brutally violate her, the R word, on this particular day. That experience for Sarah obviously broke her in every single way. She left his home carrying a baby. And I will show you a picture of her baby. She named her baby MelissaRoshan MelRo. I have been described when I've read articles, and I have to always email the editors and correct them, I've been described as a product of rape. But I'm actually a product of grace, right? The way that I came into this planet is not who I am. And I show so much gratitude for my biological mother for making the choice to have me. And I understand that certain things occurred that allowed me to become who I am constantly becoming. With that being said, Sarah ended up brutally burning my right hand because she was very overwhelmed with my crying. You see, I was born 6 months gestation, preemie. I was also born autistic and not on the edge. I'm like right in the middle there, right? So not reaching those developmental milestones. Also very colicky. I was also born with an overactive adrenal gland. What we know, just a side note, about mothers who have gone through trauma, oftentimes their wombs are actually preparing that baby for trauma. And they also pass down a lot of the trauma that they've gone through, thank you to the science of epigenetics. So what ends up happening is you will have those babies that have the lower birth rate. You will have those babies that are a bit more colicky, that are not reaching those developmental milestones and have a whole host of issues because of what they're receiving via mom in vitro, right? And after you have the baby, if there's really no connection time, it just makes it a lot harder on baby to thrive. And I was no different. But we're talking about, at this time, now my mother had me at 14. She got pregnant at 13 and a half. She has me at 14. And we're expecting this child to really understand what it means to be a mom while she's living in foster care. Remember I said that I am grateful for my mother having me and I understand why certain things happened. What ends up happening once we become trauma informed and once we start really doing the healing work is we begin to view situations in our lives from a different perspective. But we also begin to view other people's situations from a different perspective, from a more healed, trauma-informed perspective. I wasn't always at this space, right? And we'll talk about that. I had a lot of anger at certain points in my life, and there was even a time where my right hand brought me a lot of shame. So I have a third-degree burn mark on my right hand, and there were times where I would literally cover it up because I didn't like it. Why? Because the story that is attached to that scar was so deeply painful. You see, my truth was that the first person that was sent here to nourish me and to nurture me, she burned me, right? That truth was really difficult. And so I would hide my hand because of shame. And as I would go on in my life and as I would heal and do the healing work and understand that people who have gone through abuse sometimes end up becoming abusers of others, sometimes, or they become abusers of themselves. That's how I was able to look at this whole situation and my mother from a different perspective. So after that burn happened, friends, I was taken away from my mother and placed into kinship care. We already know what kinship care is. But I was placed back with my biological grandmother, the same woman that my mother was taken away from. Like, why would you place me back with the same, why would you have me drinking from the well that was dirty, right? We repeat what we don't repair. My grandmother hadn't done her healing work, and so a lot of the issues that my biological mother, Sarah, went through, I went through those as well. And they were so egregious and so difficult and abusive that I was taken away from my grandmother due to family abuse. So I was taken away from her and placed into full-blown foster care. There was years and years of trauma. Because there are youth in the room, I am not going to go deeply into certain areas of that trauma, and I don't think that we need to, right? Because how many of us, raise your hand if you need to hear another deep trauma story that's going to throw you offline? Anyone need to hear another trauma story? Raise your hand if you'd like to hear a triumphant story and solutions. Okay, so let's focus on that today. Right? But I was placed in kinship care, and then and then I was transferred into foster care. And my first foster home, let me say this, the day that I was removed from a police officer. Now, small commercial break. As you're hearing me speak, I do want you to think about, I hear her perspective, I hear her story. What are some things that could have been done differently? Right? And how can I create the change that I wish to see? Because what I'm about to say, that's a clue that that's something that's still going on in the system that we could probably change. We'll get there. First foster home, I get transferred by a police officer. We know that that can be problematic. The reason why it can be problematic is, number one, it programs the youth to believe that they have committed a crime, right? Why? Because a lot of times youth associate police officers with trouble or being bad, even if the police officer is really kind, right? So the way that we are transporting our youth, it needs to look a lot different, and dare I say a lot more holistic. The other side of it is that I was alone, right? 9 years old in the back of a police car, bawling my eyes out, not sure where I was going to go, was absolutely terrifying. So when I went to my first foster home, it was okay. I mean, the home was absolutely beautiful. It was on a sprawling lake in the state of Washington. The foster parents had a lot of kids. Myself and one other girl were the only brown faces, black brown faces in the house. And you might be saying, well, Mel, you're not brown. I'm brown on the inside, But you were supposed to laugh. That's okay. Moving on. So, but I was, there were only 2 melanated children. There were, only 2 black children in the home. And it was believed by this particular foster family that black people didn't have souls. And so on Sundays, we would go to a special church to try to pray our soul, or for our souls to regain entrance into the kingdom of God, right? Because, we were taught by this family that Black people didn't have souls. The other side of it is that and I'm going to use this language, in their eyes, all the foster youth had to eat at the foster table and eat the foster dinner. And all the foster youth lived on a separate floor away from the biological children. This created what? Divisiveness, right? And it very much felt like we were foster children, that we were less than. So my caseworker, Paul, did a check-in with me and asked how I was doing, and I told him I was fine, that I didn't really like the food as much in this particular home, and that I was praying every Sunday that I would get a soul because I was Black and I know I didn't have a soul because that's what Mom and Dad told me. Well, Paul was absolutely mortified, of course, and gets me removed from this home. And then one foster home quickly turned into 3, and then 3 turned to 5, and then 5 turned to 10. Friends, by the time I completely aged out of care, I had lived in 23 different placements. And that was 20 different foster homes, 1 group home, and 2 special places, which I'll tell you about in a moment. That is unacceptable, right? So, 1, how are we transporting our children? 2, let us stop calling youth in foster care foster youth. And what's another one that you heard? I want to hear from you. What's something else that we've heard out there? Multiple placements, exactly. Why is this child experiencing multiple placements? That's unacceptable, right? So here's the thing. When I was being transported, and I'll go back, when I was being transported, I was always carrying my things in black trash bags. Raise your hand if you know of a child that's carried their things in any type of trash bags. This is also unacceptable. Thank you, youth, for your bravery. This is also unacceptable because the message it conveys to youth is that they're not worth anything more than the trash bags that they carry. And we know this, that children will rise to the occasion of who we make them believe they are or not. So if you make me believe that I'm trash, then I'm going to rise to that occasion and I'm going to act like I'm trash. Here's another point to consider. Are we doing luggage drives? Can we do luggage drives in our places of worship or within our offices? Do we have clothing closets that are available for our youth, right? And so here I am at 15. And if you have a discerning eye, you can take a look and see something key about this photo. And what is it? Raise your hand if you can see it. Yes. Say it nice and loud. I'm getting old.
Pregnant.
I'm not pregnant. It was just bloated, but thank you. Yes, friend.
Is that a nurse gown?
It's not. Y'all talking about my nightgown today. No, it's not. Yes, friend. Aha. Thank you so much. And thank you for everyone that called out something. Yes, I'm covering my hand. I'm covering my hand. Why? Because of embarrassment. Right? But the other piece of it is I was really angry. So on the top of my head, I had a bandana. Why did I have a bandana on? Because I decided it would be a great idea to join a gang. And it seemed like a great idea because those girls that were in that gang, they were very tough. And tough to me meant, they can protect themselves because I wasn't able to protect myself. So I thought I could overcompensate by being a fighter. And I thought that, hey, if I could join this gang, then finally I would have a family. That's falsehood. And that's also not being a leader. When you decide to join a gang or you decide to befriend people who are knowingly toxic and are doing like horrible things in the community, it only messes you up, right? It doesn't, they don't care about you. Your friends that actually really care about you would never have you doing things like that, okay? And so, but I didn't know that. I just wanted sisterhood. I just wanted family. So I wasn't a leader at that time. I was a follower. And followers, they don't think for themselves. They do what everyone else says that they should do. And followers end up where? Followers can also end up in juvenile detention, which is where I was. So I ended up in juvie because I ended up selling drugs, and I sold drugs to the wrong person, an undercover cop. But he just so happened to be the right person because it probably saved my life, right? So I ended up in juvie, stayed there for 6 months. And I had this amazing probation officer, okay? And that probation officer, her name was Sandy. And Sandy was very much like you, the adults in the room, the adults that are willing to go above and beyond. Raise your hand if you're above and beyonder in this room. No above and beyonders in this room? I know you all are, right? And she was just very much that adult who would not allow me to fail and would not abandon me. And I was really mean to her. Like, I had a stink attitude. I didn't want to be bothered. I tried to just really be mean to her and push her away. Now, adults, hear me, and I know that we know this, but I just want to say this, and I'm sure that the youth in the back would echo this. When a child or a young adult is not being the kindest to you, it is not because it's not personal. Number one, an adult has let them down. So all adults are not trustworthy. We also have, youth have hormones, and those hormones make them do some pretty wonky things at times, right? What we perceive as wonky. But also we know that their prefrontal cortex hasn't fully been developed. And finally, sometimes when youth are hurt, they're just not trying to hear you and be bothered. And I was very unkind to this probation officer named Sandy, but she never gave up on me. She always brought me art supplies, and she was just always there, no matter how unkind I was. I'd like to fast forward the story for a moment to 2019. I was actually keynoting at a national foster care conference called the Daniel Memorial Conference. And at the end of my speech, who walks up to me? Sandy. And I had not seen Sandy since I was 15, right? And Sandy said this to me, and I never forgot it. She said, I always knew, and this is where I got this from. She said, I always knew that you were not a foster child. You were a child that lived in foster care. And I always knew that you were meant for so much more than your lived experiences, and that you had such a bright light, you just needed help. That's why I never gave up on you. And of course we had an ugly cry, and we hugged each other, and it was a beautiful moment. And it taught me this. It taught me that when we are doing the work, right? What's the work? Advocacy. Whatever you're doing in your discipline, that is the work. Sometimes it's like we're not seeing outcomes change. And it reminds me of this, that when we are planting seeds of hope in children, that's doing the work. But we may never see the harvest. We may never see it bloom. For me, like, I didn't bloom until I was in my late 20s, early 30s. But if Sandy was just like, you know what, let me stop being there for MelRo. Let me stop being in her life. Let me just give up on her because she is an unruly 15-year-old that decided to join a gang, and now she's in juvie, I don't know that I would have made it. So as we're doing the work, be encouraged, and know this, data is very important because it certainly allows us to measure our level of success. But it's not everything. Keep on doing the work. You don't know if maybe you are planting a seed, maybe you're watering the seed, maybe you're the sunshine for the seed. You don't know what your role is in a child's life. Just keep doing the work. Does that resonate? Yeah. And also think about this, the iceberg. The iceberg shows us the behaviors of others. That's adults, children, everybody. Right now you see me, you see my iceberg, right? But we don't know what's going on underneath. We have no idea. So I'll give you a loose example. That lady that cut you off on the road and she was just an absolute not kind person, you don't know what she is actually going through. Does that mean that it's your fault and that you deserve to be cut off? Nope, absolutely not. But please know that it's not personal. Let's go even deeper. When we're seeing certain behaviors from youth, I cringe when people say that kids are bad. They're not bad. It's that their behaviors are not desirable, but why? What has gone on to create certain behaviors in a child? When we start to become trauma-informed and more empathetic, and when we also begin to examine our own selves and realize that, hey, you were also once a kid and you were also still to this day not perfect, we put our trauma-informed lens on, and it changes the statement of, what's wrong with that kid, to, what has happened to that child, and as Mary would tell us, and what are they doing to sure thrive? And it allows us to be much more empathetic. When I got out of juvie, I went with another foster family, and I went to high school, and I ended up meeting a boy. And that boy said all the right things, passed me a little note, because we didn't have DMs back then, passed me a note and said all the things that I needed to hear, that a lonely me needed to hear, that I'm so beautiful, that, just all the things that I had never heard. And I have to say this boy also lived in foster care. It's not a coincidence. Ladies, we had a trauma bond. So together we were bonded by our trauma. And when you're bonded to someone via trauma, you're only going to create more trauma. Does that mean that everyone that lives in foster care, they cannot have a good relationship? No. What it does mean is that sometimes we attract people that are not the nicest to us and that can be abusive to us, because that's what we've been taught to believe is normal. Like, we might have been taught to believe that it's normal to be rejected, that it's normal to be abandoned, that it's normal to not feel worthy, that it's normal to experience love, fake love, and abuse. It's not. And I want you all to know that. It's not. What is normal is healthy love, love that doesn't hurt, that doesn't leave you, abandon you, or reject you. And it starts by us not abandoning and rejecting ourselves and loving ourselves, okay? Yeah. And so I'm connected to this guy, and he's very abusive. And before I knew it, I was in a full-blown teen domestic violence relationship, pregnant. 1 in 3 adolescents in the United States is a victim of verbal, sexual, or physical abuse from a dating partner. And that doesn't say youth in foster care. That says youth. It's a lot of kids. That's a lot of kids out here. And it starts really, really small, like mandating who you can hang out with, what kind of clothes you wear, wanting to go through your phone. And ladies, sometimes we can be the abuser as well. So it's really important that we're learning young, and adults, it's really important that we're also teaching the youth that we serve how to have healthy relationships. That's another point of how can we create better systems. If we're teaching them young how to have healthy relationships, then we start to heal the nucleus of the family, because they're unlearning and they're relearning. So I eventually end up having my baby, and I name him Trey. And it was absolutely terrifying. I'm 17 years old at this time, with a baby, and I live in foster care. And I've ran away from the foster home to go live with my son's father. And there's a lot of trauma, and there's a lot of abuse happening. Yeah. And it was so difficult that CPS, Child Protective Services, decided to open a case, rightfully, because there's domestic violence happening while we have a baby. Not okay. And we did not have the tools to be able to stop fighting. We just didn't. And we had a caseworker who was very judgmental. We had a caseworker who was very much like, I was a teen mom, and if I did it, you can do it too. That is very problematic, because I'm not you. And you are not me. And how I've grown up and how I perceive the world is vastly different. And so when we're working directly, if you interface with youth, we never want to take that approach, because what you would do, you're not that child, right? And we want to lean more into empathy. And that caseworker was just very impatient and very presumptuous, that if she just told us, hey, you need to stop fighting or we're going to take away your son, like, help us. I need to be in what? Anger management classes. I need to be in parenting classes. I need help. I'm also living in poverty, which creates stress. I am also neurodivergent. I'm sensory overload. Like, it's a lot. But there wasn't really any empathy, because it was more so, and I understand, let's focus on keeping the baby safe. So another fight broke out, even though we were told that the next time the next fight breaks out, we're going to take your son. Another fight broke out. Friends, here's what I did. I locked myself in the bathroom away from my son's father, because I knew that if I go out, I'm hitting you right in the face, right? So let me lock myself in the bathroom and figure this out. I see a window behind me, and I think, if I jump out this window while my baby is asleep up here? Raise your hand if you don't know about CASA. Okay? CASA stands for Court Appointed Special Advocate, and a CASA is a volunteer that literally is almost like an attorney, but is an advocate for youth that are in the court systems. They're speaking on your behalf. They want what's best for you. And that CASA volunteer represented Trey and I as a unit. And that CASA volunteer had a different idea. You see, that CASA volunteer thought that it might be a good idea for Trey and I to be able to stay together, but live in a home together where I could learn to be a mom and take care of him. Raise your hand if you think that might have been a good idea. Okay, raise your hand if you think that maybe Trey should have been taken away from me and placed in a safe environment while I got myself together. Okay, raise your hand if, mom, dad, and Trey should all be together and let's try to figure it out. Okay, raise your hand if you just don't know, you need more information. Okay, all right, fair. So that CASA volunteer thought it would be best that we stay together. We stay in the unit together, and that's what she advocated for. And that's what the judge, the magistrate decided, that we would be able to, it's not changing, that we would be able to stay together and stay as a unit. But there was one stipulation, and that stipulation was that we had 24 hours to find a place to live. 24 hours when you don't think you had changed. 24 hours when I did not have a mom or a dad. 24 hours when I don't have any money. I'm barely going to school and I have a new baby. What? Right? Sometimes it seems like the system is set up against young moms. It really does. And I think that we can change that, can't we? That's why we're here and we're ideating. And I see a lot of you taking notes and I appreciate that, right? But the magistrate agreed. We had 24 hours to find a place to live, and my court-appointed, my CASA volunteer found a vacancy in a teen parenting home called the Aradell Mitchell Home. And this teen parenting home is absolutely beautiful. It is a full-blown apartment building with fully furnished, units that mothers can come and live in with structure. And that structure looks like no having guests in the apartment unless it's a caseworker. The structure looks like you had to be in the building at 9 p.m. on the weeknights and 11 p.m. on the weekends with an alarm that would sound if you would push the door, right? And it also meant that we were taking parenting classes and we were learning how to balance our checkbooks and QuickBooks and all the things and love ourselves. And it changed my life. And the really cool thing is I sit on the board of directors for the same place. And we're still doing amazing work. So I'm really grateful for that. But I lived in this teen parenting home for 2 years. And it wasn't the easiest because now I had to learn how to be an adult. See, a lot of times we expect our youth to just figure it out. They should know how to cook and clean and know how to do all the things. And then nobody in this room, but a lot of folks out there get upset at you for not knowing. Yeah. So I love when I see programs that are developed for our youth to know life skills so that they can thrive and take care of themselves. I was approached at the end of my journey at the teen parenting home by a modeling agent. And that modeling agent, she said something to me that I heard before, but I didn't believe it. She said that she thought that I was beautiful, and she gave me her business card. And I was so deeply afraid to take this woman's card, but I was even more afraid of never knowing what would happen if I made that phone call. And I thought about self-sabotaging that opportunity, which a lot of times youth will do because they feel inherently that they're not good enough. So our job and our duty, we get to teach them that you are worthy for the opportunities. Friends, my very first modeling job, when I show up, my hair is done, makeup's done, looking amazing. And, I show up on set and the client's like, well, you look amazing today, but we're actually not going to be photographing your face. We're going to be photographing your hands. And I was absolutely terrified. Why? Because I had spent my whole life covering up the scar. Now I had to be vulnerable. Now I had to actually show my scars. And I thought about self-sabotaging that because I was really afraid, because I would have rather covered my scars than to have had this opportunity. But then I thought about New York rent, because one thing I didn't tell you is that my son and I, we ended up moving to New York. I got so successful as a model that I decided to move to the most expensive city in the country. Why not? You know? And we moved right before 9/11. So we showed up July 31st, 2001, right before 9/11. And let me say this, quick commercial break. 9/11 for me was like very much how it probably was the pandemic for our youth, in the sense of when something traumatic like that happens and you've already gone through a lot of trauma, you don't know that you're resilient until you have to be resilient. You don't know that you're strong until you have to be strong. But how many of us know that being resilient and strong is also exhaustive? So total side note, when people are like, oh, you're so strong, you're so resilient, I'm like, that's not a compliment. I appreciate the sentiment, but sister is tired. But I didn't know how strong I was until I had to be. So when I had to walk 6 hours to go get my son and the phone lines were down and all of the things, I wasn't in freak out mode. But some of our youth probably were during the pandemic, because it meant like a lot of families are not going to want to take me because they think I might have the virus. Or it meant I'm away from my biological families. I hope that they're okay. I wonder how they're doing. Or it meant, is the world ever going to go back to normal? So, you know, my heart goes out to youth, especially when these type of things happen. But I will say that 9/11 made me think about two people. It made me think about my biological parents. I wanted to know if they were okay, really. And so when the phone lines came back up, I tried to 411 my biological mom. 411 is a way that you could have Googled people's information in the past. So I called 411, and I think they still have it. I called 411 trying to find her. I couldn't find her. And at that point, I was like, listen, I'm just going to focus on modeling, forget that I ever was in foster care. Yeah. How many of us know that that's not the way trauma works at all? But I tried my best. So I ended up doing this modeling. It's not turning. So it's not shifting. So I ended up doing this first modeling job, and they photographed my hands, and the client, thank you. And the client didn't say anything about my scars. And that was so bizarre and wild to me, because I'm like, wait, the scars that I've been covering my whole life, y'all just don't see it. You're just not going to say anything about it. And what I learned in that moment, this is for you, is that your scars make you beautiful. They do. So the very things that you legit are embarrassed about, they give you character. Shame is not your name. Shame is also not your portion, okay? So learn to embrace you and practice radical acceptance of all of who you are. There's nothing wrong with you. And actually, if you flip the letters of wrong around, it says grown. Okay? Is that helpful? Okay. It'd be weird if you said no, but anyways. And it would be okay if you said no. So side note, present day, my hands have been featured in probably more than 30 different ads. It's proof that our scars make us beautiful. There's nothing wrong with us. Listen, I tried my best to just focus on modeling. I tried my best to forget my painful past. For a time, I suffered really badly with a eating disorder. We know that this is a trauma response. I ended up getting married to a guy who was not good for me at all. Experienced more domestic violence. Why? Why did that happen? Is it because all men are bad? Or was it that there was something within me that was constantly in resonance with abusers? It's the latter. People are amazing. I just happened to attract the ones that weren't, because I still believed that love and hurt should go together, and they absolutely do not. And so remember I said in the beginning that people who have gone through abuse, they often end up becoming abusers? It's true. I ended up becoming abusive toward myself. And to be honest with you, parenting my son, there were a lot of mistakes that I made that I have not made with my 17-year-old. thanks to being trauma informed and healed. Like I was very much, when he was a teenager, that mom that was like getting in his face, cussing him out at times, yelling, and all the things that are just not helpful, that are more harmful because of the way that I was socialized. And you might be saying, girl, well, that's just what Black moms do. And it doesn't mean that it's always helpful, and it doesn't mean that it's always healing, and it doesn't mean that it's always healthy. And so remember I said we do the work so that we can do the work. When we're constantly working on ourselves, everyone around us benefits, from our children, our partners, our spouses, and to the work on the outside, okay? But anyway, so I'm going through the eating disorders, and I'm in this domestic violence relationship, and I'm not being nice to myself. I wasn't kind to my mind. This was not a safe space to be. And I always like to say that it's better to deal with your issues before they deal with you, because they always will. They always catch up with you. I tried my best to forget my painful past, but it was here. And it lived with me on a daily basis. And just a total side note, even where Source has allowed me to be now, I still live with the trauma. I still live with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. There are some smells and some sounds that I go offline. And so what I've learned, that we're constantly in a state of recovery. Our finish line is always moving, but that doesn't mean finish line is always moving, let's give up. It means that, it is okay that I am not perfect. It is okay that I am constantly on this healing journey. It's okay that I don't have it all the way together. I do need to just keep going. And I also had to learn as an adult, this is not for the youth, that the wound might have been the fault of that person, that person, and that person, and that person, and that person. But healing is ultimately my responsibility. Why not? And that's not for our youth. That's for our adults. But friends, I did get to a point where I was so tired. And I'm talking about that tiredness in your soul, where you're just like, I literally cannot take anymore. Raise your hand if you know someone who's ever been in that space. Yeah. And, we know that we never want to make permanent decisions over problems that are temporary. I didn't realize that the domestic violence was temporary, that the eating disorder was temporary, that all this stuff that was going on in my mind was temporary, that there could be another side if I would heal. What I knew is that I was tired, and there was no opportunity for me to rest. I will say this. I do wish, and I don't know if this is even available, that those that have gone through heavy loads of trauma, that they could go on disability. Why? Because even trying to show up in the world sometimes can really be difficult, right? When you're also trying to heal yourself. I got tired, friends. All the beautiful photos, all the likes on Instagram, it didn't mean anything because I didn't like myself. And so I made a choice, and that choice was that I was not going to be here anymore. And by the grace, I'm still here. But I had a very, clear plan. I was going to execute that plan, and it just didn't happen. It didn't go through. But I did end up in a psych ward, and they shackled me down by my hands and my feet. And it was probably one of the lowest, 100%, one of the lowest points of my life. Because here I was, had been on 7 magazine covers around all these different celebrities. None of the magazine covers mattered, and none of those celebrities were around. I had on a Chanel blouse that day, and I traded it for a hospital gown. And I was shackled down in my mind. I was in prison in my mind, so low. And I remember feeling that while I'm in this hospital bed, I have 2 choices. I could either rise and get myself up. That's going to be really hard. Or I could just try it again, which would also be really hard, because it would be hard not being around my children. But how many of us know that we have to choose our hard? Life can be hard. We have to choose the hard. And I decided to rise. And part of that meant that I had to stop modeling for quite some time, because I wanted to understand what this whole idea of beauty meant. And I knew that it had nothing to do with like lace fronts and wigs and eyelashes and looking a certain way and being a certain weight. I knew it had everything to do with the content of my heart. And I also knew that it meant not becoming like who's harmed you. Because it would be really, really convenient and easy, choose your hard, be really easy for me to become just like those folks and for me to lash out. But what I learned and I'm learning is the beauty of loving it out rather than lashing it out. And what loving it out means is that you heal and you do your work. So I started going to therapy and I'm still in therapy. And I feel like everyone should be if you live in today's day and age, because this world can be really heavy. And especially as servant leaders, we have to be able to pour from the overflow, not from an empty cup, right? And it's really harmful when we are not in a good space and maybe we're a bit more snappy toward our clients and snappy toward one another. That's not helpful. It's not helpful for you and it's not helpful for those that are around us. So it behooves us to be able to pour this stuff out, get it out, and have someone also hold space for us so we can have the tools to navigate. And friends, when I was in therapy, being in therapy, but the earlier days, I was like, hey, I got a lot of issues. This is very discouraging. And what my therapist helped me to realize is that you can look at all your problems. If you got anxiety issues, panic attacks, whatever the case may be, you can look at those as like stones, like little pebbles, stones. And those stones, you can either climb on top of those stones and climb yourself out of a ditch of despair, or you can allow those stones to bury you. The choice is yours. It's the power of choice. So I decided to climb up out of that ditch of despair. Stopped modeling for years because I wanted to be very clear on what beauty meant. And again, I discovered it's the beauty of not becoming like those who have harmed you. And it's also choosing to become a cycle breaker. So in other words, you're saying X, Y, and Z ran in my family, but I'm going to decide to let it run out with me. And it was quiet. It was quiet. I would spend a lot of time by the water, meditating, going into myself and learning and unlearning. Yeah, learning helpful ways of being, healthy ways of being, unlearning harmful ways of being, and understanding that, again, none of what happened was my fault at all, but healing was my responsibility. I would end up getting the amazing opportunity to meet Sarah and had a really healing conversation with her about just the fact that I was really grateful that she chose to have me. I did not ask her about my hand because what was she gonna say? We already know what it is. And I needed to say this to her, thank you. And I also told her that I forgave her for not being in my life because she was very concerned that I was angry. I was angry, and that's okay. But I also forgave her for me, not for her. I also eventually ended up meeting my biological father, and that was harder for me because this is the man that violated my mother. And I am an advocate for youth. So it was a bit more, difficult having a conversation with him, but here's the thing, I didn't want to end up in a psych ward anymore. So I was willing to do the hard part. I was willing to have the hard conversations. I was willing to meet my parents as a way to help me heal. And I'm very sensitive to the fact that some youth don't ever get to meet their parents and how hurtful that is. And so I want to uplift those youth as well. And also, side note, I'm very sensitive to youth that have to go through the Father's Days and the Mother's Days and the birthdays and the holidays, and they may not have their people with them. So I just want to uplift those youth as well and let you know that you are seen if that's how you feel. All right. After I ended up meeting my father and meeting my mother, and now I'm in therapy, I didn't really stumble. This was very purposeful for my life path on statistics that exist for youth in foster care. And I hit every one of those. And these are absolutely unacceptable. That children in foster care, notice again, it doesn't say foster youth, but children in foster care are 2 times more likely to experience pregnancy, 30% more likely by the age of 19 to be incarcerated, 2 times more likely than war vets to live with PTSD, and 30% of the homeless population are actually, have lived in foster care. This is unacceptable, and this is also preventable, right? But then I also learned about adverse childhood experiences and how it gives you a point for every type of trauma that you've gone through. The higher the score, the more likely you are to experience certain health outcomes. This is also preventable as well and treatable. How? By building resiliency in our youth and within ourselves. Friends, in 2021, I actually suffered a stroke. I'm not a smoker. I'm not a drinker. Don't do drugs. But my body had kept the score, and my body remembered how much I had gone through, and it just kind of shut down, right? And so I know that me having an ACEs score of 9 out of 10, that there are certain health outcomes that are kind of waiting for me. But I also know that that doesn't have to be my portion, right? I can completely make different healthy choices, which I am, so that I can thrive and live the life that I wish to live. And we can also help our youth and families get there as well through education and through, it's not turning again, through, yes it is, thank you, through education and unlearning and relearning. And how is that possible? By us doing that work first and then going out and teaching it. I am really encouraged to know that Steve Jobs also lived in foster care. So did Coco Chanel. So did Willie Nelson. So did Tiffany Haddish, who's a friend of mine. So did Oprah Winfrey. So did Nelson Mandela and your presenter, MelissaRoshan, or MelRo. And what we all have in common is this, it's the power of choice. At some point in our lives, we said, no more. This is not going to be my fate. And then we aligned ourselves with our purpose. How do you know what your purpose is? It's that thing that breaks your heart the most. Yeah. And our purpose is to love. And that love comes out in different expressions. Love is service. That's what you're doing. No one in here, I can make the assumption that no one in here is a billionaire. Is anyone and if you are a billionaire, can I get a personal loan? But raise your hand if you're a billionaire. Okay, we got billionaires. Okay, speak it, sis, speak it. Actually, all the youth need to raise your hand. How many billionaires in the room? Okay, right. All the youth need to raise their hands, right? But in this present moment, we don't have $1 billion in our accounts. We know that this work is not going to make us fiscally rich, but it's all about our hearts. And so I want to applaud you all for the work that you're doing. And I just want to say to the youth that, you got next. Miss MelRo and all these greats, they're getting older. They're tired, right? So it's your time. Not necessarily to speak, because you don't have to unless you want to, but it is your time to go out in the world and take the experiences that you've gone through that weren't your fault. They weren't, and you didn't deserve it. You can take those experiences and you can choose to not become like the people that have harmed you, and take the experiences and get with an adult that you trust to help you get your stuff popping and get your dreams and goals realized, okay? So I ended up doing a TED Talk, being on the Bishop T.D. Jakes show and the Oprah Winfrey Network and on many major news networks. And I'm really grateful for that, but that is not what I'm most proud of. What I am most proud of is who I'm becoming and who I'm constantly unbecoming. And the fact that I know that healing is possible and that I am out here doing the good work. That is what I am most proud of. That is legacy. I also ended up aligning with CASA, and I was a DEI director for the state of Ohio's CASA for about 2.5 years until that contract ended. I'm still great friends with them, but now on a national level, I'm traveling around teaching DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion for CASA, and also trauma and triumph and building resiliency and all of the things. And I'm most proud of the mother that I've become. I'm the world's most okayest mom, seriously. And I'm still learning, right? I'm still learning. My son eventually did end up graduating from college with honors. He is an engineer living in DC now. And I have to be honest, we don't have the best connection. Because remember, I had my son at 17, and so he grew up with me, right? And there were some of my ways of being that didn't jive with him, and I'm very sensitive to that. from my perspective, it's kind of like, oh, I wish you could show me a bit more grace, bud. But he's where he is right now. So please send us prayers in that connection. But I'm also at peace that I wasn't perfect, and that I'm willing to always adjust and willing to hold space when he's ready to do that. And I wanted to be honest about that because I think honesty is important, right? And I think sometimes that we have keynote speakers who just aren't telling the full story. How can we heal if we're not? The other piece of it is that now I have an amazing, she was younger here, but I have an amazing 17-year-old daughter who is a published author, who, is on the honor roll. And even if she wasn't, she's amazing because of who she is. And so getting the opportunity to be her mom, but I'm also seeing what being a healed parent looks like, as opposed to not all the way being healed with my son, Trey. So I'm encouraged to always tell other foster parents or bio families, primary families, that, hey, it's okay. It's you made some mistakes, and those mistakes have harmed others. But what are we doing right now? How do we get you to a point where we're healing? Because I see the difference in how both children kind of show up in the world differently. I know that healing works. So my path for healing has included inner child healing work, cognitive behavioral health therapy, EMDR therapy, sound therapy. I've got a lot of self-care rituals. I practice radical self-acceptance, meaning I accept all of who I am. There's no part of my story that I am embarrassed of. I love journaling and I love purposeful fun. And we know, Lauren knows that I love to meditate. I was out in my car remembering to get back to my breath, because this allows me to ground my energy, and it allows the fears of, what if I make a mistake in front of my friends when I keynote? Or, I've got to talk about trauma, and what if I go off online? So the meditative practice allows me to clear out my mind and go back to my breath. And it's really beautiful because my daughter gets to see her mom speak, and now she's speaking and she's inspired to go out in the world and be the change that she wishes to see. So present day, I am still navigating life, still unlearning, still relearning. And part of my advocacy work did take me to one of the countries that's in my bloodline, which is Ghana, and that is in West Africa. And I decided to go over there it's called Sankofa Sojourn. So Sankofa Sojourn is when a Black person from the Americas or the islands goes over to, or just a Black melanated person who's not living in Africa decides to go back to their homeland to learn about the beautiful culture. This is a Sankofa Sojourn. So I gifted myself that opportunity in 2018. But I knew that I didn't just want to do touristy educational stuff. I knew that I wanted to actually meet youth and work with youth over there. And I got the amazing opportunity to meet these group of girls who were not doing the best, right? They had a lot of our same lived experiences. They did, except it was different because it was in West Africa, meaning there is no foster care over there. There's, you can adopt, but adoption's not huge over there, right? These kids were just winging it and trying to figure out life on their own. And I never came in as a savior. I came in as a servant leader to say, how can I show support and not colonize the area? And I ended up deciding to build a school. And let this encourage you that you can do anything. This is no shot at anyone who is gone to school and has a lot of letters behind their name. You have my utmost respect. I'm a huge advocate for college. I will say that I don't have those letters. In front of my name. What I do have is a heart to serve. And what I do have is a knowing that I can do anything that I put my mind to, including build a school. So I built MelRo's Girls School. We had over 400 girls that were attending there. I shut the school down during COVID because I couldn't afford to maintain it on my own. And I started building a second, which is on halt for now, but I'm still working on it as I'm working on me, as I'm a single mom, as I'm doing great works in the United States. Listen, friends, I truly believe this, okay? Hear me when I say this, that what is broken you can lead to your breakthrough, right? So if it breaks you, it can lead to your breakthrough and the breakthrough for others if you are willing to do the work, the inner life work, right? Which is an ongoing process. Then you are able to flip your painful stories to purpose and power. Yeah, and help others tell a new story. This is true innovation, and it's leveraging lived experiences to what? To implement system change. By you all inviting someone with lived experience, a lived experience ambassador, to come and teach and to speak, that is how we create system change. We are going to be able to hear from the youth what they feel is best practices, because they are the current experts as well. This is how we create that change. When we imagine and reimagine, and I call it the possibilities. I don't say possibilities anymore. I say possibilities. I brought CASA's word in there because they're a huge part of my life. I believe that we can create a passport, not a prison, for our youth's futures. When I say that, it's that, like, when you're looking at something, your perspective, if you're looking at it from a negative way, that is almost like a prison mindset. It doesn't allow you to see that there's a whole bunch of different possibilities. When you are looking at things through an empathetic, compassionate, trauma-informed lens, that's a passport that allows you to go anywhere and see the big picture. I hope that that makes sense and that resonates. So friends, this picture of me on the left is when I was a baby, okay? And that's me now, and I did not plan to wear the same outfit. Like, I literally stumbled upon this picture and I was like, are you kidding me? Right. So we never know who a child is going to become and unbecome. Remember, as we are doing the work and we're advocating and we're holding space and we're doing this work, we can't get hung up on the data. Well, why is that family not changed? Why is that kid still the same? We've got to remember to do our work on the inside, that internal inner life work, so that we can do the work for others. And if we get tired in this work, it's okay to rest and call on help. We don't have to do this alone. So as we're listening to the other workshops today, right? Let's really, really invest our time. Let's dive in and immerse and throw ourselves into this work and decide today that think about what's not working for you, right? Within your own self, or maybe within your respective places of work, in your offices. What's not working? What do we want to leave behind at the Educational Service Center? And what new innovative ideas do we want to take? Because again, we never know who a child's going to become, and we are here solely for the children, are we not? Right? All right. So this last slide, I love this quote, and that is that the most profound discovery is that the light destroys darkness. Part of my name, actually Roshan, it means to give light. And until my last breath, that is what I'm going to do. I believe that the children the most damaged in this world actually end up becoming the very ones to transform it. And I also believe in the power of never becoming like those who cause us harm, but rather those who promote healing. So friends, I invite you now to take down my website. I am a trainer and I teach on diversity, equity, inclusion services. I can do this in person or via Zoom. I am just in Columbus, Ohio. I am also a life coach. I work directly with youth. I do a lot of, it's called I Thrive with MelRo, and I do a lot of work with youth via Zoom or in person. And I'm also available for more keynotes. I thank you all so very much for your time. Again, thank you to the team for entrusting me and bringing me out here. And I ask that you just take good care of yourselves on your lunch. Yeah, go outside, get some sunshine. You are essential and you are so very appreciated. And thank you so very much for your time. Take good care. Thank you.